Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. All about nutrition from your favorite dietitian. Everything you need to digest in your mind. Tips with Tony. Tips with Tony. Making you healthier one bite at a time. With Tony. Woo.
Hello and welcome to the Tips with Tony podcast. I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time. I'm very excited for you to meet our very next guest. I have virtually in front of me Stacy. She is a blogger, podcaster, author, foster mom, which is like so cool in itself. She does a lot. She's has a big social media presence and is a really great influencer for so many reasons. But one of the things that I really wanted to have her on here to talk about today is talking about just what health means and how we can define it, going against societal standards, fighting against fat phobia. There's so many topics that I wanted to talk about today. So I'm super excited to have Stacy on here. Stacy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's on video, so you can prove it. I started blushing as you were talking. I appreciate all those kind words. And I'm not just a foster mom. I'm also a mom. So I have 4 kids total, ages 17 to 12. And we're currently adopting our foster kiddo. So it's been a wild ride for quite a while.
Congratulations. That's so exciting and so special. I think it really takes a special person to open up their heart and their home to someone that's not biologically related to them, and then to go that extra mile. And now I'm sure that you feel like you have a son, right? He's being adopted.
They're actually non-binary. So,
okay.
Yeah. But I have 3 biological sons. Yes.
That's amazing. Well, either way, I know that they're going to feel loved and supported. They already do. And I'm sure you feel like they're part of the family. No difference.
Yep.
That's really, really special. Well, anyways, I'm really excited to talk about today. So before we get into today's episode, I would love for you to just share who you are, what you do, and most importantly, why you do what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. If I would have been asked this question 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, every time the answer is different. I had a health awakening, so to speak, in 2010. I had a really difficult 3rd pregnancy, and it was after my 3rd son was born. And I just felt exhausted. Like I did not feel good. And I was really looking for a change. I had been a chronic dieter my whole life. Like I went to fat camp, I have just been on that cycle, that wagon for so long, and I was tired of it, and I wanted to get off the roller coaster. So I was trying to get away from conventional wisdom and discovered paleo at the time, which felt very along that path for me. And it was a journey that was part of my journey. And I became a competitive athlete, and I actually came to CrossFit after paleo. Like I was so
it influenced you.
Exactly. So paleo told me about CrossFit versus vice versa. And for a while I was Northern Virginia's strongest woman. I won a state competition. It was stuff. I was a big lifter, and I lost over 100 pounds, and I was pointing to that as health. Right? Like I was pointing to performance, and I was pointing to weight loss as health, but I'd achieved it through diet culture. I was limiting carbs. I was, obsessing about food and macros and trying everything to figure out why I couldn't lose weight anymore, even though I was doing 3-hour workout sessions, including cardio and lifting, multiple times a week. I was doing CrossFit, I was doing all these things, and I could not get the scale to budge. And to me, in my mind at the time, that was what was really important for health. And meanwhile, it was actually harming my health. My hair was falling out. I found a thyroid nodule, and things were actually happening negatively to my body that hadn't happened before I was on this supposed health journey. So I started once I kind of had that second awakening after, having a scare of cancer and all these things and looking into why was my thyroid having this freak out, and all these things, and realizing that limiting food and limiting nutrients as much as I had been was really a huge part of why I wasn't feeling as good as I was leading on, right? Like I was having all these digestive issues. I wasn't absorbing what I was eating because I don't have a gallbladder. And, things were just running right through me. I wasn't nourished and I didn't feel it. So in 2013, I said, you know what, like, I'm going to give up the scale. I'm going to give up trying to prove myself. I'd already written books and all these things. And I just felt like if I never get to a goal weight, so to speak, right? If I never get to whatever that constantly moving idea that we have of ourselves will be, because my goal was never to lose 100 pounds. Like you know what I mean? My original self would have been over the moon with that. But the dial always moves in diet culture. It doesn't matter what your goals are. It's never enough. And so, I felt like I have to stop this. I am back on the roller coaster. This is not helping my health. I really need to focus on this. And I started talking about fat phobia and my own body dysmorphia back in 2013. And so from there, it has really been a journey to really understand health ever since. And that definition for me has evolved over that time. But I find myself in the community today of, the popularity of anti-diet, the awakening of fat phobia and these understandings is really something that I think happened through the pandemic, through, social justice, and through, honestly, Gen Z on TikTok. Like, they taught me I don't have to get weighed at the doctor's office, right? Like, I think that there's a whole generation out there and that is moving us forward. And now I'm seen as one of these people that kind of knows about this for a long time because I've been talking about it and learning it. And I think this journey is one that no matter how long you're doing it, there's always more work to be done. There's more unlearning to do. There's more work to happen. So I'm sure you and your listeners have experienced that, right? It's always like a light bulb moment when I start kind of picking these things apart.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like you've been part of this movement for over a decade at this point. And so part of me wants to be like, it's probably very refreshing to see the Gen Z, generation, like really moving things along. And then at the other part, like you just said, there's still more work to be done. It's like, nope, we have not stopped. If anything, we're just getting started, So, but it's really cool to hear that you are almost like the beginning of that. Cause I know I know we've been trying to change it for a really long time, but it does sound like you're like ahead of the trend. It's a good trend though.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good trend. I think on my podcast, like I recently did a podcast, 2-part talking about going to fat camp. And there were things that I talked about in that podcast that, were awakenings for me through that conversation. Like I do think that diet culture has influenced us for generations. And, I grew up with my mom doing this crazy diet that tanked her health and was the reason she lost her gallbladder. It was like a tofu hot dog only diet. Like it was, I think like on some days she ate like a piece of fruit and on other days she ate a hot dog and that was it. And she lost 40 pounds, quotation marks. Great. Right. And then what happened as soon as she started eating again, she put it all back on plus some. Plus her health had tanked and she had to get her gallbladder removed. So I think it's generationally built into us. And to see Gen Z now moving it forward, hopefully they will learn, right? Like diet culture got so bad for a while and now we're pulling it back and hopefully their children will not experience all the things we did.
Right. Well, and it comes from us healing ourselves and our bodies and how we talk to ourselves. And that's truly how we're not going to pass it on to the next generation. So we have to live it, breathe it, be it, and then it won't, transpire for sure. So it sounds like you really went on your own like personal health journey, which you thought was health and you learned is actually not healthy. So how would you define health now?
So I was really proud of myself for my 40th birthday. I went and got all my blood work done. I got my pap done. I got my mammogram done. I did all the things. And that to me was health. Like it was self-care, the action of self-care and looking into these things. And then looking at the results and saying, okay, where are the areas that I want to improve? I had long COVID and I have like crazy inflammation as a result of long COVID. And we were able to measure that through blood tests and go back every 3 months. And I can see that the work that I'm doing is pulling that inflammation down. And it had nothing to do with dieting. It had nothing to do with exercise. It had to do with self-care and being committed to really like closing out all of those things in our minds that we're convinced are the things that are the problem. Like if you have a stomach ache, everybody just always assumes, what do I eat? Instead, like we know from science that really stress is the number one cause of these things. And doctors don't ask you, they might casually say like, and how's your stress level? Okay. And they check a box on their form. But like, did you just experience, a change in jobs? Did you have a life altering thing happen? I get emails from people who are like, I think I have to give up sparkling water because all these bad things are happening. And that's the only new thing that I've added in my life. I'm like, what else is going on in your life other than food? Did you have a job change? Did you recently get sick? How are your personal relationships? Are you sleeping well? It's like, oh my gosh, all those things. Yes, I'm having a really hard time. I'm like, yeah, it's not the sparkling water. To me, health is about being able to kind of like truly try to get rid of all those thoughts in your head, and they will creep back in because it is endless in our culture, to say, I am not going to convince myself that like, I have personally done something to harm my body. Instead, I'm going to change that conversation and say, what can I do to help my body, to nourish my body, to love my body? And sometimes that looks like comfort. Sometimes that looks like taking a day on the sofa and doing nothing. Sometimes that's a day where I'm out and about doing all the things and I crash at the end of the day and I'm like, wow, that was a great busy day. But for me, it's not either, right? I can't be go, go, go all the time or else my hormones get out of whack. And it's also not being lethargic all the time. Like we need to move our bodies in ways that work for us. So I personally think that how do you measure health? You look at markers of health and you see how you can make improvements if you want to or need to make improvements. So for me, inflammation isn't something that like everybody would get from their annual physical. That's something that I asked my doctor for because I had long COVID, because I have autoimmune disease. And it's something that we can look at and say, oh yeah, we're tracking great. Like, even though it's not in the green right now, look how much it's come down over the last 6 months. Just keep doing what you're doing and it should keep going. So I think that we can all find those things in ourselves. Maybe that's blood sugar for someone else. I have great blood pressure. I have great blood pressure and blood sugar, right? Like, but if one of those things is out of whack for someone, there are lifestyle factors other than food that affect those things that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you didn't mention weight at all.
It has absolutely nothing to do with it.
I love that, because it's literally like your health, like you said, you get to decide and choose really what I'm hearing you say. It's like what's important to you, but realizing that like your blood sugar regulation, your stress management, your blood pressure, right? Like inflammation, right? Those are the way that you're predicting your health now, not like older versions of you where it was more about like the number on the scale, or I know for me, that was a big one for me. So since you brought up kind of going to the doctor, I really do want to kind of talk about how fat phobia, weight stigma and bias plays a role in today's society, particularly in the medical world.
Yeah, it's horrifying out there for big people. So, for your listeners, I'll just let them know, like, I am a very large body. I've been in a very large body my whole life. The classification of obese is something that I've experienced since I was, probably 12 years old. And I think what I experienced, I didn't really fully understand until I'd lost a bunch of weight and was starting to be treated differently. And I started to recognized that when I would say something like what I was experiencing, someone would respond differently than how they would have responded previously, right? And I'll give an example. A few years ago, I was a competitive athlete, and I ended up with a really bad case of, I'm going to ruin the punchline for you, vertigo. And it was caused by dehydration because I was working out. I was training for a competition, and part of what you're going to do in a competition is you have to be weighed in. You don't want to have water weight, just all of these things that really have nothing to do with health. If people understood what competitive athletes go through, they're usually the people who have heart issues and all kinds of stuff, right? Like it's really hard on your body. And so I was experiencing a bunch of issues, and I went to the doctor, and the doctor told me that I had something in my intestines that is something that people who eat a very nutrient poor diet have, right? Like, and I say nutrient poor because those are the words that he used. I'm talking about like something that you could expect someone who is lethargic and eats a lot of fast food would have this kind of thing intestinally. Doctor did not ask me about my exercise. Doctor didn't ask me about any of these things. And I went on to realize later that it was, it became more and more of a problem because he was like, oh, you need to see a specialist, whatever. And ultimately I ended up going to the ER because I was really worried. If you have vertigo, and it's bad, it can feel, it can feel like the world is ending, right? And it got to that point. So I went to the ER. And they weren't sure if I was going to need surgery because I had told them that my doctor thought that I had an intestinal problem. And so they put an IV in me. And within 20 or 30 minutes, I felt better. And so, short story long, I was the one who figured out that it was dehydration. Because when the doctor came in, I said, I'm actually feeling so much better already. My vertigo is reducing. Do you think that it might have something to do with what you put in the IV? And he's like, I didn't put anything in the IV. That's saline solution. Have you been dehydrated? Do you exercise a lot? And I was like, oh yeah. The doctor was like, well, there it is. What you have is vertigo from dehydration. And it took an ER doctor putting in an IV to prep me for an ER to realize that what I had was something related to exercise, because not a single person asked me. And they had the medical bias of looking at someone in a larger body and assuming that I couldn't have been exercising, I couldn't have been dehydrated, that I must be lethargic and eat a lot of fast food.
I'm so frustrated for you. I'm sorry. I know you processed that a while ago. I'm processing it right now because I'm thinking and I'm reflecting on it. It's so sad because it even feel like it happens in family dynamics, right? So say you have two siblings, let's say sisters, and I'm using personal experience. So you have two sisters. One is in a larger body. The other one's in a what quote unquote today's societal standards of normal would be, not overweight, not obese. And they complain about the same thing. The person in the larger body is going to be like, well, did you eat eat your veggies? What do you mean? You just stop eating the sugar. Whereas the other one would be like, are you okay? You could just be dehydrated. You know what I mean? You get a different sort of response just based on nothing other than body size. And it's the ignorance that's so frustrating. It's the idea of not asking clarifying questions that's so frustrating. And then obviously the icing on the cake, which is literally being treated so differently that you had to go to the ER when it could have literally just been, can you drink some Gatorade and I'll see you later. Oh my God. Yeah. So frustrating.
I think what's heartbreaking even more than that is that there are people who die because of the medical bias. And it's even worse in people of color, right? I am fortunate that I am an affluent white woman who was able to go to the ER because I have medical health insurance and advocate for myself and, these kinds of things. And there are really sad statistics and science around people who, there's one particular study, I'll send you the link if we need to, I don't know if you do show notes or what you do, but
yeah.
There's one particular study where they looked at people in autopsies to see what the cause of death was, or to see if they had other health ailments that had gone undiagnosed. It was a really significant statistic. I want to say like 75 or 80% of people had issues that had gone undiagnosed that either contributed to or caused their death, that were in like obese bodies. That it's not just about like, oh, we knew that they had blood pressure problems and then they had a heart attack. It was like they had lung cancer, but because they went to the doctor complaining about not being able to breathe, the doctor told them to exercise instead of doing a lung scan and determining that they had lung cancer. That happens tragically so often, especially in, areas that are less affluent and in people of color. It's and it's really hard to find doctors who will respect that you could be healthy at any size, or that you still deserve a quality of life care the same as someone who is healthy in a smaller body. Like, let's say you're in a larger body and you're not healthy. That doesn't mean you're any less worthy of being treated like a human being, the same as the next person. And what we see is that stigma that is associated with the fat phobia is part of the problem in and of itself. That stigma causes health problems because people don't go to the doctor as much, because they don't want to be told things that are going to bother them, because they have shame. They choose maladaptive coping behaviors that lead to unhealthy habits. That the stigma itself is a contributory factor to the perpetual cycle of unhealthy choices.
Yeah, no, we need to do better. We need to do better. I mean, I wonder, I think just the medical training, just they need to incorporate some sort of like non-biased training. I don't know if they do that, but they really need to start, because it's insane. I had an endocrine doctor, Dr. Dodell, who is on Instagram as Everything Endocrine. He's fantastic. I had him on the show and we talked about that. And he said that the research is way overwhelming, that the BMI scale is worthless and needs to be thrown out, yet it's still taught in school. Like, it takes 20 years for medical research to make its way into the textbooks. And that, this is not something that's taught in, like, bedside manner in general is not really taught to doctors. And so you can't address something that you're not even teaching to begin with, right? Like, you can't fix something that you're not teaching. And it's kind of like, I have 4 teenagers, right? They don't learn any life skills. Like, somehow they leave high school knowing calculus and trig and, European history from 400 years ago, but they don't know how to do their own taxes or write a check when they leave high school. And I think it's that same kind of thing with doctors, right? Like, where did we go wrong that we're losing like the basic, most important thing, really? Yeah, no, it's such a good point. It's such a good point. Oh man. Okay. Well, God, I feel like I have so many other questions. You wrote 3 books. I feel like I want to go there. Which of your books do you think, I mean, our listeners probably benefit from reading all of them, but maybe tell us more about your books and which one you think, like, knowing my audience are people, mostly women, who struggled with disordered eating habits and behaviors, and they're learning to break up with dieting, make peace with food in their bodies, and just live a balanced, healthy lifestyle. That's my audience. Knowing that, like, of all your books, is there one in particular, like, they have to read, or do you think they just have to read all of them?
No, I don't want them to read any of those books. They're all diet books. I at the time convinced myself that it was better, right? My most recent and last published book was called Real Life Paleo, and it was about incorporating it to family life and not being strict with rules, and understanding that adding things like vegetables is more important than, restrictions and being super perfect. And I think that's kind of along the trajectory that I was, right? As I started with this, strict, very diet culture mindset. I kind of worked my way there. And now I'm at a place where I'm like, I don't even want to talk about food. There's so many other things in our life, not just things that you can control, like your sleep or movement, but also things in our environment that are huge contributors to our health that nobody else is scrutinizing, the different kinds of things that play a role in all the facets of our health. And when we can look at things like our cleaning products or what we put on our skin or the furniture that you buy that off gases, and we can see that that has an impact to your health and your hormones, and that food in and of itself is ranked really low on that list of things that impact us. Like if you look at things like your cholesterol is affected less than 20%, less than 10% for most people, but less than 20% by food. The rest, the majority of it is affected by your lifestyle and reducing your inflammation. So if you think about, for me, inflammation is a big one because it controls your body's ability to regulate everything else. If it's in flight or fight mode and it's inflamed, it's not going to be able to do anything else because that's its priority. So I think that for me, if I'm recommending to someone where to start, I think my website has articles on things like, medical weight stigma and progress of these things. My podcast, I talk about this almost every single week with experts and I dive into science and share research. You were on my podcast. So I think those are much better places to start than my book. And I know that doesn't help me because I
really just gained so much respect for you right now just by doing that. Cause, I didn't want to miss the opportunity to let you talk about it because I know as a published author myself, it's it takes so much work to produce and put it out.
Oh, yeah, that was a decade of my life. Yeah.
But I also love that you're able to make peace with that was a part of your life that no longer is, aligns with what you're preaching now. Rather than promote it, just know that you can be proud of yourself for doing it, but it's just not for our listeners, like my listeners right now, and even yours on your podcast. So I think that's great. But your share the name of your podcast and your blog. We're not done, but just share that really quick.
The Whole View is the name of my podcast, and my blog is realeverything.com.
Yes. And I'll be putting that in the show notes for sure. One thing I definitely want to ask you about is you were a competitive athlete for a while, and then you had mentioned kind of what you do now in regards to your health is kind of, moving in ways that feel good to you. So I am curious how you were able to repair your relationship with exercise after doing it in a competitive way and in an extreme way for so long.
I had a really serious injury that at 32 years old, I thought I was going to need back surgery. I wasn't able to walk. I had young children who we wanted to go on vacations. I remember we went to Jamaica and we were climbing a waterfall, and is my back injury, my injuries from my back. And it was really severe. Let me just be really clear. It was a really severe injury. And I tweaked my back, and the rest of the vacation, literally all I could do was lay down. And I just remember thinking I don't want to live this life. I don't want to miss out on life because I'm trying to stand up to this ideal of whatever these things are. I need to admit to myself, I have a back injury. There's no shame in that. There's a lot of people of all different sizes of bodies that have back injuries. And I think that's one of the things about weight stigma is people like myself are afraid to say, oh, I have a back injury, because the assumption on the other side is, oh, you don't have enough core strength. Oh, you didn't do this. Oh, it's your fault because of whatever. If you just lost weight, then it would be easier. All these different things that I've heard or
the weight loss with the knee injuries and the back injuries.
Yep. And so I just realized I was missing out on life, and I was done with that. And so I talked to the doctor, and I was like, you know what? I got a cortisone steroid treatment in my back instead of doing the surgery. I was so young. I didn't want to risk back surgery being bad, because in most cases you need surgeries to recover from your surgery, and it's a very long process. And I was then able to go to PT, physical therapy, and get my stability in my back to they said 90%. And the surgeon said that he would only be able to get me to 80%. And so the doctor was like, there's nothing else we can do for you. Like, you've done more for yourself than we could do. And I did that by focusing on my inflammation, by focusing on bone health, by focusing on things that I knew were backed by science as able to support my injury. And I do notice that when I'm stressed and when I don't take care of myself, that my back is more likely to flare. So it's things like sleep, it's things like rest. It's, I have some stretches and exercises that I do to continue my PT on a regular basis. And then my sport of choice is water aerobics because it is easy on the joints and the bones. And I mean, to go from being a competitive strength athlete to being the youngest person in the water aerobics pool with all the blue-haired ladies is quite a shock. But honestly, amazing. I love those ladies. Like, they've become my people, Since our foster kid came, it's been very difficult for me to do things because I'm a treatment foster care parent, which means that I'm basically a live-in therapist full time. And they have high needs from high trauma. And it's taken a lot out of me emotionally and physically and time-wise because they can't be left alone. So I am at a place now where they're in a good place. Their schools just started back up. And my mindset around exercise, like I'm sure we all get out of our routines and need to get back into them, is I'm not thinking about it in terms of like, how am I ever going to get back into, 5 times a week? It needs to be this, it needs to be that. I'm like, I just need to get on the Peloton once. That's another thing that doesn't bother my back. Or I just need to make it to water aerobics once. And then honestly, like, those things make me feel so good when I do them, endorphin wise and whatever, that I want to do more of them. And I think that's really the mindset that we all need to have around movement, is whether it's tap dancing or jazzercise or walking around your neighborhood, or at one point my husband and I bought rollerblades so that we could like rollerblade up and down the street together and our kids could still be home or in the yard and we wouldn't have like left them, just finding things like that bring joy. Yeah,
I love that. It's interesting because you had an injury, which seems like, it's like, oh, that's a bad thing that happened. Oh, that sucks that you got injured.
Yeah, it was for a while.
And I know it was in that moment. And I know because where the shifts happened for me in healing my relationship with my food and my body was I got mono and SIBO together. It was torture. So I was exhausted. I was getting sick all the time. My immune system was shot. And I had no energy at all. Like, mono just wipes you out.
Yeah.
It was really felt like I was dragging a body every day. And in that moment, I was so frustrated because I had gotten to the leanest place I've ever been. I was crushing my work. Everything was just I felt like, oh my God, I finally got it. When the thing you've been working on for your whole life. And so when I got sick, I was, so much of an identity shift. I was devastated. I was depressed. There was so much in that moment that was I was so pissed. I was so frustrated. But looking back now, that is literally the best thing that it could have ever happened to me, because it's shifted so much. My relationship with food, my relationship with my body, the birth of my book, everything, what I'm able to preach about, to connect with people like you. So in the season of it, it felt horrible, but really it was actually a blessing in disguise. So I know it sounds very similar to you. It's really shifted things for you and released a lot of that pressure of your workouts have to be this long and this hard and this much for it to count.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add, while you were talking, it reminded me of how many people I've heard in my life say that they got really sick and it was great because it allowed them to lose 5 to 10 pounds. Have you seen, I think it's The Devil Wears Prada, where at the end, Emily Blunt is talking about how it's great she was able to fit into some sort of fancy Vogue dress because she got the stomach flu or whatever. And I mean, it's just in pop culture. I love that movie, right?
Right.
Everywhere in our pop culture, that influence. And so my takeaway from your story is that it wasn't just that, you got sick. It's that you were at a place to kind of have that realization and have it click. And the one thing that I would tell people is whether they're having the awakening or they're wishing somebody else would have the awakening, you can't force that on somebody, because if they get mono and then they're like, but I lost the 10 pounds and that's what I want. Like, there's nothing that you can say or do to help them see that, other than just like live your life the way that you want and hope that it attracts their interest eventually. And I know that because before I had my first son, so when I was, I want to say like 22, right? And I was doing another diet, and I was like, all I was doing was drinking water and eating unsalted pretzels. And I remember my coworker saying to me, but like, that's not giving you any nutrients. Like, if you're going to choose to not eat something, like, to limit your eating, what about, some other food options that are also low fat or whatever the fat was at the time, right? And like, it did not click for me. Like, I thought that she was rude for butting into my business. I thought she could not identify with me because she didn't exist in a larger body. And meanwhile, this woman was trying to help me. Like, she didn't exist in a larger body, and she was looking at my body going, you're not nourishing yourself in a way that, had I been ready to hear it, I could have heard it. And I often think back to that, because I hear from people like, oh, I just get so frustrated because my sister or my husband or whoever doesn't get it. And so many of us are surrounded by, you see them for the holidays and you can expect them to give you a side eye when you take a second helping of something, or to say something about your weight, or to talk about their diet. And for me, I've just gotten to this point where I'm like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I don't want to talk about that. And disconnected myself from it, because all it's doing is it's like an energy vampire. It's sucking the joy away from you to be around that. And so if people keep pouring into trying to convince that person and they're not ready, it's taking from them instead of helping the other person.
Yeah, so much. Yeah, I have to get better at practicing that. I don't want to talk about that. As a dietitian, I think people just assume that like I want to talk about their diets, and I like, even if they know, it's funny because even the opposite happens now. Like, so before it used to be like, they'd ask me about what I thought about this, what I thought about that, and blah, 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 and all this diet and that. Now they know from following me on social media that like, I don't want to talk about the diet. But like my mom the other day, love her, she's sweet, but she's like, they call me Toe. Toe, it looks like you lost weight. Is it okay that I said that? It's like, actually, it's not, Mom, but it.
Right.
But like, in my mind, I'm like, it's whatever. I just
like, I would send your mom.
So fed up.
Send your mom a TikTok of, somebody. I saw one the other day where somebody, someone had commented that they, looked thinner, and they did like the split personality thing, right? Where they go to the other screen and they're like, actually, I have cancer. The reason that I'm thinner is not because I'm healthy. Please stop talking about my body. I'm like, exactly. Like, it's never okay to talk about someone's body.
Yeah. It's funny because, not funny, but I say that when, actually just posted a reel today about like when someone comments, like, it looks like you've gained weight, and then start giving unsolicited advice. Interestingly enough, when I had first recorded it, I had originally, because I could have done like anything. It's like, I don't remember asking for your opinion. So like originally my words over it were like, oh, it looks like you've lost weight. Like, don't get too skinny, because I've heard that too. It's like no matter which way you go, the point is stop commenting on people's bodies. That's the point. Like, whether it's too thin, too small, it doesn't matter. It's not your business, and you have no idea what is going on in that person's head and in that person's body that could be contributing to the weight gain or loss. And I think it's just important that we remind people to just cut it out and stop it. And then also to speak up about it and to just say like, no, it's not okay. Or I don't want to talk about that. Or no, thank you. Or that's not your business to know.
Yeah, I totally agree. And another thing that I do and say, when I first saw people after quarantine, some of my children had gained weight, and like they were going through a global pandemic and super depressed from being in virtual school and in a home with boredom and nothing to do and no friends to see. And food had become a comfort for some of them. And I specifically said to people, like some people who I knew were prone to comment on weight, before I saw them, I said, I want to let you know that some of the family members are in larger bodies than we were before the pandemic, and we do not want to talk about it. Please do not say anything about any of our bodies. And when I proactively said it like that, of course, there was like a, well, I would never. And you know what I mean? Like that whole perspective. And it just kind of shut it down from like, we're not even going to go there because that's going to ruin us seeing you. And the experience is, I'm not worried about that weight and that body. Like as soon as the, quarantine lifted, like everybody in the house out, go outside, play with friends, like have fun, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm going to choose to handle it. I don't need advice from somebody else to put my kid on a yo-yo diet, which science says countless times, never put children on a diet. Like every scientific literature piece everywhere is like, do not put children on a diet because it will mess with their hormones and that will affect them for their lifetime. And I strongly know that because of the things that I did at younger age, it's very difficult for my body to self-regulate. And I don't want that for my children. I don't want them to have to constantly be struggling with that. And it's easier, in my opinion, to just embrace being in a larger body and living your life and being happy than it is to constantly feel like you're letting the world down because you're not meeting some arbitrary standard that they feel is like the classification for human beings. Like this is the standard we've set. Even though 200 years ago, the standard was, larger bodies are where we respect people and whatever, right? It's completely arbitrary.
100%, 1,000%. There was years ago where if you were in a larger body, you were considered like you had money and you were rich and that was what was looked up to and that was what was desirable. And, and now if you think about
it, the fertility goddess,
Yeah. And then like when we had like models, like Twiggy was the center, that's when being stick thin was considered, like the beauty standard. Now we have like the Kardashians and now people are coming to us and now that's the new body standard. So now people who are super, in very thin bodies and they're not in curvy bodies, they feel like they're not good enough. So the societal standards change. And one just came to me. There was a time where like women would intentionally like plick their eyebrows. Do you like, I don't remember what era that was.
The 20s.
I think, they would like literally like the thinner, the better. And like now I can't imagine I think plucking my eyebrows just hurts. So just the fact of like doing that intentionally for so long. And like now like thick eyebrows are in, right? So
I can tell that you're a generation younger than me because it was the 90s. And so in the 20s, it was like just a thin line completely. And the 90s, you had like this little like Nike swoosh, right? You had like a thing here, but then it was like pencil thin to the rest. I remember like trying to grow them back in took years, right? Like just trying to grow back in. Something else that you mentioned really stuck with me and reminded me. So you said Kardashians are the beauty standards. So something I want people to consider is even the Kardashians Photoshop their photos. They have all they do is literally revolves around their looks. They work out, they have plastic surgery, they have full-time people who help with their beauty routines. And even then, they still feel the need to edit their photos and are caught doing it all the time. And so if even the standard that we're setting, right? Like you said, the Kardashians are the standard. If even the person setting the standard can't meet their own standard and are still photoshopping it, how are any of us ever going to meet a standard? That's what I mean by the dial is constantly moving. It's constantly saying, you're not enough. You need to do more. And no matter what, it puts you in this perpetual cycle where you're compelled to spend money. You're in this multi-billion-dollar industry of the diet culture and the beauty industry that is convincing you that you need to spend money on all these things, whether it's, exercise equipment and diet products and, supplements that most of them really don't do anything for you, right? Like all these things, diet teas, like who knows what, I don't even know what they're selling because I have it all muted on my social media, but that is what it exists for, right? And I just want everyone to think like, if a Kardashian has to modify their own photo, like I need to just love myself because I'm never going to get to a point where I'm better than that,
I love it. So true. Such a good point that you just made. Oh, this is so good. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up today?
I did have something that you and I talked about on my show that I felt was worth talking about. So earlier on, we were talking about medical bias, and I had said that I was doing certain things that were showing progress towards reducing my inflammation. And I mentioned things like sleep. And honestly, I haven't changed my movement at all. And I do nothing formally other than, like occasionally go for walks or like do things with my family because of the reasons that I told you earlier. And also because life, right? Life is a lot these days. And so what I have been doing, what was a priority for me, is I quit coffee. Through the pandemic, I quit booze because I was like, that's going to be a really slippery slope for me. I don't even drink a lot. Maybe a couple of nights a week, maybe one night a week. And then like when I'm out with my friends or something, right? Like I really don't drink a lot of booze, but I said, that's going to be a slippery slope because I'm going to be home. I'm going to be stressed out. And I don't want to, be reliant on that because studies show that if you drink a lot, it actually increases the chances of adverse effects of the flu, which at the time was the only thing that we had to compare to COVID. And so I was like, my husband was an essential worker and he brought COVID home. And I was like, he could bring COVID home again anytime. And I don't want to increase my risk factor for that. So quit booze. And then after I had long COVID and I was having these inflammation issues and I was looking into all these problems that I had a measurement done for my cortisol. And I realized that like where the crux of my hormone issues were coming from was an increase in stress from cortisol. And I didn't drink that much coffee 5 times a week. And it was like, one shot in an Americano, or it was like a normal sized coffee cup. And then half the time I would be getting a half calf or, 2 days a week, I didn't do caffeine at all because I knew that it had the potential effects to harm my health. And I said, you know what? I don't feel great when I drink coffee. Yes, I got like an energy surge and my brain can kind of focus, but I find that my moods are unstable. Like I was super moody and I just felt like I wasn't in control of myself the way that I wanted to be. And part of that was long COVID affects your brain. It's inflammation, in my case, in my brain. And I didn't feel great. And so I was like, I'm going to quit coffee and I'm going to replace that coffee with an energizing smoothie in the morning. It's not to say that like everybody has to have a smoothie. You can have any kind of nutrient rich breakfast, right? I mean, just like a plain piece of bread isn't going to do it for you either. I wanted something that was going to nourish my body. And I put bone broth protein in it, kind of like collagen. And I put like a dehydrated vegetable and fruit packet in it. And then I also added like fresh fruits and vegetables like spinach, bananas, like different kinds of things. And that was it. I don't have a gallbladder, so it's hard for me to digest real food in the morning. A smoothie worked great. And it was something that I could like replace that habit with, where I wanted something to kind of hold in a cup in the morning to continue my habit. And that allowed me to do it. And I took a lot of naps the first week.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Instead of like relying on a sugar boost, right? Like instead of, a lot of us have that afternoon craving where, you know, we kind of start to crash, instead of being like, oh, let me find something to fill that energy source to let me keep going. I listened to my body and I was like, okay, my body says I'm tired. I'm going to go take a nap. And I fortunately work from home and I have the ability to do that. In most cases, sometimes not with the kids and husband's schedule, but I found that after a week or two, I no longer had that problem. And my body had adjusted to telling me to go to bed at an earlier time. Like I used to go to bed at like 1 to 2 a.m. Now my body was telling me between 10 and 11 to go to bed. And I was waking up on my own just fine. And it was like all of these natural rhythms allowed, like they clicked into place for me. And that I like directly attribute to the improved health measurements, because it wasn't just about quitting coffee. I had done that before and just replaced it with decaf. And that didn't allow my body to fully like wake up in the morning and say, oh, you're nourishing us. Like we're awake. We have all this wonderful stuff. Let's go. And then I certainly wasn't like listening to my body in the afternoon if it was telling me to rest or different kinds of things. And so making that commitment was the only way I got over long COVID. I had long COVID for like a year and a half, and I had a really difficult time functioning. I've had so many instances of really, really problems with my brain, big problems. Like, I don't know how many times I would be on the podcast and have to like look up a word, and it was like right there in my head and I just couldn't find it.
Brain fog is with that.
It was really overwhelming. And for someone who, like, I pride myself on my brain a bit, like it was especially hard. So to be able to not just feel better, like my moods regulated, right? Like, and all these things. And then it takes about 3 months for your cortisol to show up in tests as being different. Like it's one of those long tests. It's not like vitamin C where you can take a bunch of pills and the next day you see a result. It takes a long time. And so I just kind of had to have confidence that I was feeling better and that's what mattered. And of course, the test results came in as we discussed earlier that way. But I just wanted to mention, because I like to tell people that story, that like it had nothing to do with what I was eating or with movement or anything. I mean, yes, I added a smoothie, but honestly, it could have been any breakfast that works for anybody. Right. And that quitting coffee was a game changer for me.
Yeah. Well, I think deeper than that, yes, obviously adding in nutrient dense foods, but the fact that you were listening to your body. I think there's so many people that have, especially that afternoon cup of coffee or that sugar boost or whatever it is in the afternoon to help them to get through till night. And then they get their, what they call their second wind. And then they're staying up till, like you said, like 1, 2 in the morning, and it's completely disrupting their sleep cycles. Like you finally got to this place where you can trust your body wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Like, because you're not taking anything to mask how you're actually feeling.
Yes. Yeah. It's so true. And I was a proponent of that before I was doing it. And I would tell people, listen to your body. And then my body was telling me it was tired in the afternoon. And I would have a cup of decaf and a few squares of dark chocolate and be like, well, this is okay. This is just decaf and dark chocolate. If that's what you want to do with your body, like, that's your choice. But for me, I was trying to improve my health, and that was not me listening to my body. That was me silencing my body, right? Like that was me being like, go away. I don't have time for that right now. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you want to break the cycle, then it's like, you're going to have to push through the fatigue in the afternoon. I know it's real rough. If you can take a nap, 20-minute power naps are my jam, but sometimes it's not always feasible. So, but then it's like, make a commitment if you have the ability to, like, get to bed at a decent hour. So now you're not hauling ass the second day.
Yeah. Oh gosh. The first few weeks, I remember telling my husband, like, I'm going to bed before the kids. Like I was in bed those first couple of weeks while I was like adjusting. Yeah. It was like 8 p.m. And I'd be like, I'm going to bed. He was like, are you okay? And I was like, I'm fine, but I'm going to bed.
Yeah. But you're recovering because for so long you were dismissing when you felt tired or fatigued and you were pushing through it. And it's like, one thing I'll never stop like being so like amazed and proud of our bodies are just how they are so good at keeping us at equilibrium and balancing us. It's like, that's literally how it's designed. And it's like just so fascinating that like your body literally will get you there. You just have to let go of trying to control it and just honor and listen. And the more you fine tune it, it really will balance you out. Like, I think the biggest fear I think people have is like, well, if I told myself I don't have to work out ever, I'll never work out. Like, that's not true. Like, you're gonna eventually, your body is gonna like want to move. It might not be a workout like maybe you're used to seeing in that capacity of like, you know, an hour of structured exercise, but like, you're probably going to be like tired of laying on the couch at some point. You're going to like want to walk and move your legs a little bit, right? Like, I know when I had COVID, oh my God, my legs were killing me. You know, like the muscle aches. Did you get that?
Oh, the whole body aches.
Oh, the body aches. But then eventually it's like, I didn't know if my legs were hurting me because it was like the body aches or the fact that I haven't gotten out of the bed for 4 days. I was like, something hurts. Like, when I want to move, you know, but our bodies are really good at balancing us out. So we can do it. We just have to learn to trust it. But oh my God, this is so good. I don't want to take up any more of your time. Before we wrap up, Stacy, please remind everybody where they can find you, connect with you, listen to your podcast, ask you questions on social, and get in touch with you.
Sure. The Whole View, that's WHOLE, is available in any podcast app on the iHeart network. And you can find my website, realeverything.com, and that will connect you to my personal non-toxic beauty business, as well as my social media and tons of articles that are supported by science that include a lot of the research that we talked about today and things like, you know, weight discrimination, fat phobia, medical bias, all those things.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, Stacy. For those listening, thank you. For those listening, if you enjoyed this episode, take a screenshot of it, share it on your story, and tag me and tag Stacy. If you have not subscribed to the Tips with Tony podcast, definitely hit that subscribe button or hit the follow button, because when you are subscribed, you will be notified when a new episode comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, that is it for me today. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'm Tony Marinucci, your registered dietitian, helping you get healthy one bite at a time.